The residence was tranquil, the suburban hush interrupted only by the far-off murmur of traffic. Bridget, an accomplished attorney with an ostensibly flawless life, stood at the kitchen basin, gazing out the window at the tidily groomed lawns of her neighbors' dwellings. Her spouse, Clark, a structural engineer, was absent on yet another business excursion, and their 2 offspring were soundly slumbering upstairs. Despite the external picturesque veneer, a profound sense of isolation consumed her. One day, her younger sibling Kyle relocated to New York and temporarily lodged with her household. Kyle, 5 years her junior, was a carefree individual recuperating from a recent emotional distress and pursuing a new beginning. The siblings had always been tight-knit, and his company brought a glimmer of delight to her mundane existence. His mirth and laid-back demeanor evoked memories of uncomplicated times, of days spent dashing through meadows and ascending trees. As the weeks elapsed, the rapport between them started to evolve. One late evening, unable to doze due to occupational anxiety, Bridget discovered Kyle in the kitchen preparing her a mug of cocoa. The kitchen was faintly illuminated, the sole light emanating from the gentle radiance of the stove. They seated themselves at the table, the coziness of the cup in their palms, recalling youthful recollections and confiding their sentiments of solitude. Kyle gazed at her, his eyes mirroring the shimmer of the stove light. "You shouldn't have to bear so much alone," he murmured, his tone infused with a compassion that roused something profound within her. The ambience grew dense with unvoiced strain. Bridget's pulse quickened, the accustomed burden of her duties momentarily alleviated. They conversed for hours, the dialogue streaming effortlessly, each phrase a soothing remedy to their spirits. When they ultimately retired for the night, the atmosphere between them was imbued with an unarticulated comprehension. Over the subsequent few weeks, their exchanges became increasingly intricate. Following a familial assembly, Kyle ventured outside to puff on a cigarette in the backyard. The chilly night breeze enveloped him, the lunar glow bathing the garden in a silvery sheen. Bridget accompanied him, the gravel's crunch beneath her feet the lone sound. They stood adjacent, the gap between them narrowing with each utterance. Beneath the moonbeams, they discussed their emotions and remorse. The air was laden with the aroma of nicotine and the unuttered realities that lingered between them. Without forewarning, Kyle inclined and bestowed a kiss upon her. Bridget wavered for an instant, but did not retreat. The kiss was gentle, hesitant, yet it kindled a flame within her that she hadn't acknowledged existed. Their concealed liaison commenced, sneaking into furtive instances when Clark and the youngsters were absent. For Bridget, Kyle replenished an emptiness she hadn't acknowledged was so profound. His caress, his grin, and the manner in which he regarded her made her feel vivacious in a way she hadn't in ages. But their illicit affection arrived with a hefty toll, culpability and the incessant dread of exposure. Bridget began to comprehend that this bond could demolish not only her kin, but also the connection she and Kyle possessed as siblings. The remorse tormented her, each pilfered moment a double-sided blade. She discovered herself perpetually tense, her nerves worn by the apprehension of revelation. Yet she couldn't compel herself to terminate it. Kyle was a beacon, a link to a fragment of herself she presumed lost. Their surreptitious rendezvous transformed into a wellspring of both solace and anguish, each kiss a reminder of the gamble they undertook. One evening following an exceptionally fervent encounter, Bridget reclined in bed, her heart throbbing. She couldn't dispel the sensation of disquiet, the awareness that their deeds were amiss. She turned over, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts a whirlwind of sentiments. What would transpire if Clark uncovered the truth? What would befall their progeny? The gravity of these inquiries maintained her vigil, her contemplations a tumultuous vortex of feelings. Kyle, detecting her distress, attempted to console her. "We can resolve this," he whispered one night as they rested in the shadows, his arm enfolding her. "We merely need to be prudent." But the trepidation of disclosure merely escalated. Bridget found herself growing increasingly aloof, her communications with Clark and the youngsters tense. She recognized the necessity to conclude it, but the notion of forfeiting Kyle was nearly insufferable. The strain between them persisted in escalating, each shared moment both a wellspring of joy and sorrow. Their closeness was a ballet of purloined instants, each contact a concealed intimacy. One afternoon while Clark was at a symposium and the youngsters were at academy, Bridget and Kyle found themselves unaccompanied in the abode. The air was dense with expectation as they traversed the familiar chambers, their hearts pulsating in harmony. They convened in the study, the delicate illumination from the window casting silhouettes across the room. Kyle's gaze locked with hers, and wordlessly they drew nearer. His palms found her midsection, his contact soft yet assured, sending tremors down her spine. She inclined towards him, her lips meeting his in an embrace that was both pressing and gentle. The kiss intensified, their tongues intertwining as they delved into each other's mouths. Kyle's hands wandered over her back, drawing her nearer, his contact kindling a blaze within her. They faltered to the sofa, their actions awkward with yearning. Kyle's digits traced the contour of her jaw, his thumb lightly skimming her lips. She shut her eyes, relishing the feeling, her breath coming in quick pants. He kissed her nape, his lips blazing a trail down to her clavicle. She bowed her back, her figure reacting to his contact, her hands gliding up to entwine in his locks. Kyle's hands shifted to the fastenings of her blouse, his digits quivering slightly as he released each one. The material dropped away, unveiling her lacy brassiere. He paused, his eyes shadowy with craving as he absorbed the sight of her. Bridget's heart pounded, the strength of his stare making her feel both exposed and mighty. He leaned in, his lips brushing against the delicate cloth, his breath heated against her skin. She quivered, her hands sliding down to the edge of his tee, her digits slipping underneath the fabric to traverse the smooth skin of his back. He moaned softly, his hands shifting to her hips, pulling her nearer as he kissed her again. The warmth between them was nearly insufferable, their bodies shifting in a cadence that was both recognizable and novel. Bridget's hands shifted to the clasp of his denims, her digits trembling as she released it. Kyle's breath caught as she nudged the fabric down, her hands gliding over his hips. He interrupted the kiss, his eyes encountering hers, an inquiry in his gaze. She nodded, her voice barely a murmur. Yes. He tugged her into his lap, his hands roving over her figure, contacting, venturing. She sensed the heat of him, the manner his figure reacted to hers, and it only amplified her yearning. They shifted together, their actions slow and sensuous, each contact a testimony to the profundity of their bond. The universe around them dissolved, leaving only the two of them entangled in a prohibited clinch. The days subsequent to their meetings were a haze. Bridget traversed the routines of her everyday life, but her heart felt vacant. She pined for him desperately, the lack of his company a persistent pain. She attempted to concentrate on her profession and her kin, but the recollection of their stolen instants tormented her. She recognized she had to discover a means to advance, to recuperate, and to reconstruct the fragments of her life that had been fractured. One evening as she stood solo by the window, the dawn light seeping through the drapes, Bridget understood that the trail ahead would be filled with trials. She had to discover a means to reconcile her prior deeds with her current duties. The future was uncertain and brimming with quiet distress, but she knew that she had to attempt. She inhaled deeply, bracing herself for the voyage ahead, resolved to discover a means to rectify things, even if it entailed confronting the repercussions of her selections. Ultimately, Kyle chose to depart, concluding their affair. They convened one final time in the backyard, the moon projecting lengthy shadows over the garden. "We can't persist with this, but I'll never lament adoring you," he expressed, his voice fracturing. Bridget observed him leave, her eyes brimming with a blend of grief and yearning. The burden of their verdict settled heavily on her shoulders. The dwelling was muted, the darkness cloaking every nook as Bridget crept down the corridor, her heart burdened with the heft of her verdicts. She was aware that the path forward would be arduous, but she was prepared to encounter it. For the first instance in a lengthy span, she felt a spark of optimism, a conviction that she could uncover a means to progress, to mend, and to reconstruct her life. The reminiscence of Kyle's contact and the strength of their instance together would linger with her, a poignant reminder of the depth of her emotions and the intricacy of her preferences.